You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I am Steph, and I have a guest here with me today, a really great author. So before we dive into his newest book, I am going to turn it over to him so he can introduce himself and let you know where you can find him online.
Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Nicholas Pearson. I am the author of a whole bunch of books, but the most recent one is Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense. I'm a longtime rockhound and geoscience nerd and folklore fanatic, and I do my best to weave together all those parallel streams into everything that I do. And if anyone wants to learn more about this book or any of my others or all the other stuff I do, you can find me online at www.theluminouspearl.com and on social media at The Luminous Pearl in most places.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for chatting. And rockhound is going to be my new favorite word of the day. I absolutely love that. How did you get started? Was it just as a child you were like, I love shiny objects and they called to you, or how did that happen?
I mean, more or less, yeah. And not just necessarily shiny objects, but certainly they were the kind of pinnacle of it. I have really fond memories of picking up rocks everywhere. So it might be like the family vacation to the mountains, because I'm from Florida. We're not really famous for our rocks. You know, our beaches might have little bits of limestone and coquina, but not much else. So I had to like outsource my rocks from places like other states or gravel driveways and the landscaping rocks at the grocery store, you know, all the fun things. And between that and my fascination with my grandmother's jewelry box, she was particularly fond of vintage turquoise jewelry. I guess my grandfather observed this corvid-like desire to collect all the fun shiny tokens, and he gave me my first piece of quartz. And you know, put very bluntly, my life has never been the same.
I love that. I feel like so many of us have, as kids, we have this like innate desire to go after like the rocks and like the shiny things. I know when you go to museums, they always have like the rock collection in the gift shop, and that's always what kids gravitate towards. And I love that some of us never grow out of that.
Yeah, it's you know, it's kind of funny because for a long time, I really expected that I was going to be doing other things with my life, and this would just be, you know, something for fun on the side. I immersed myself in the geology of it, the folklore of it. I love the history behind this kind of human mineral relationship, whether that's, you know, medieval lapidary grimoires or you know, folk tales that kind of center on like geomyths are kind of cultural attempts to explain geological and geographic phenomena across the world. And I love the kind of mystical and the mineralogical with pretty equal weight. But it was never supposed to be my main gig. I originally intended to go to school for either science or music or language, and then I managed to do a little bit of all three, but not complete any of that. And I fell back into the earth science field, and you know, life just kind of took me in a completely different route eventually.
I love all of the books that you have. I did not even know that you had so many. I was like so excited because I really love that you make them so specific because a lot of crystal books are very broad, and it's great to get that overview. But then when you want to know more, I did not even realize how many different topics you could deep dive into with crystals throughout all your books.
Yeah, you know, I'm a book lover at heart. I collect books, I mean, probably with greater frequency than I collect rocks at this point in my life, because a rock really has to be extraordinary for me to put it on the shelf, but a book just has to be a book. And books about rocks are like the perfect intersection of two of my greatest loves. So I've got quite the large crystal library. And although the majority of the texts are, we'll say, metaphysically or magically oriented, I do have a lot of like earth science books and history books kind of related to the topic. But there are just so many general approaches, and every author does something different, and that's why I continue to love and read. And maybe I don't go out of my way for 101 books to add to my library as often as I used to. I still appreciate that the the connection between human and mineral runs so deep that we're never going to run out of things to say about it, and we're never going to run out of new things to talk about. But I really like trying to find an angle other folks haven't done, or if it overlaps with something that has been broached, I try to do it in a new and exciting way as much as possible. On the one hand, there are no original ideas anywhere in the universe, but at the same time, we're all going to articulate them a little bit differently. So even like this book, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, it's by far not the first book on protection with crystals. But I really wanted it to not just regurgitate what's in all of the other books. I mean, there are homages to my friends and mentors and teachers and colleagues in the book. I certainly cite plenty of sources in it, because I believe that all of us as authors are a part of a living, breathing tradition, particularly in the kind of witchy and magical sphere. So I find it helpful to um, provide those references, those resources, and then also to add something, to put my own personal take on it. So that's part of the reason I've done so many books that are hyper focused on one teeny little aspect, like healing the heart with crystals, or crystals in the divine feminine, or crystals and karmic healing, and so on and so forth, because those are like untapped gems out there, and hopefully I'll continue doing lots more of that.
Yeah, I absolutely hope so too. I think it's really helpful because start getting started with crystals can be overwhelming. Like once you get a beginner book and you be like, okay, I got the basics. I have, these five, and then you realize just how much you can do with them. It starts to get to be a lot really quickly, and some people might give up at that point. So I appreciate books that get into the specifics and give you just one direction to kind of work with things as you grow and learn.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance, because at the same time, we can't presuppose greater than 101 knowledge, if we want things to be accessible to beginners. So that balance between the two is always something I enjoy trying to do in new ways. There's only so many times you can write about cleansing crystals or charging crystals without getting bored as the writer.
True.
So exploring different topics, different ideas, different ways to achieve similar outcomes keeps me excited in the basics. And at the end of the day, I use a similar kind of phrase when I talk to my Reiki students. Like we are all, irrespective of how long we've been doing it, we're all still beginners at heart. We all still must perform the basics, the foundations, because if we don't do that, we can't build upon it. So I've got to make sure that I'm revisiting the basics in every book, so that way I'm being authentic about my relationship to these practices and to the stones themselves. And that's something that I like about writing. It keeps me engaged, it keeps me honest. Because if I'm really rusty on something, I probably need to do it before I write about it. And hopefully, if I just keep writing books, I never get rusty.
That's such an excellent way to view it. I never thought of that, but that's true. And especially with a lot of the beginner or basic information, you kind of just do it on autopilot after a while and you forget that you're doing it. You forget how to explain it to somebody else. So constantly revisiting that is smart.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, practice makes permanent. It doesn't necessarily make perfect, but it can make things achievable through that autopilot. But the more mindful we are, the more we get out of it. And that's kind of like one of the big planks in my platform generally with crystals is developing relationship. And we don't develop a relationship by being on autopilot. We don't do it with people, therefore we don't do it with our spirit allies, whether they're um, plant spirits or stone spirits or land spirits. We really have to be mindful. And that's what I challenge myself to do every time I dive into a new project.
And speaking of diving into the new project, what inspired you to write this one, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, and what can new readers expect from this book?
So there are kind of two main reasons I wrote this book. Um, the one that is more selfish and the one that is more service oriented, but really they're kind of the same. Because at the end of the day, one helps achieve the other. And on the selfish side of it, I was a really sensitive kid, in every sense of that word. I, you know, I was the weird kid. I was bullied. I was, all of the things that I think so many of us who are in the occultosphere probably experience as outsiders. And then, some of us just turn being an outside into our spiritual and sometimes professional practice. Um, and I I didn't necessarily have a regular practice of enforcing psychic, social, emotional boundaries. And I certainly wasn't on top of my psychic hygiene unless it was just before ritual or something along those lines in my teens. And that was harmful. Like it was really disruptive to my life to be that sensitive to everything under the sun, to the emotions of other people, to planetary astrological kind of tides, to the big kind of currents in the larger social sphere. And at some point I got really sick of that. And I got some really good advice a few years ago from a dear friend and colleague, Dan Lupicino, who said, "I'm going to give you the same advice that I give all of my other empathic clients, especially the ones I've been known for a long time." And I'll censor his advice ever so slightly, but he said, quite frankly, just mind your own business. And I thought, how clever to put it so bluntly. Like when we are this sensitive, we are essentially involving ourselves in other people's stuff. The emotions that the cashier in the mall has are none of my business. The way people on the internet feel about me, not useful to my everyday life. So I've been really working to have, I won't say very strong and impermeable boundaries in those kinds of situations, but I definitely want to be mindful of how much I'm internalizing. You want to be able to show up for people without taking their baggage home with you. The other side of this, the other like main reason I decided to make this a focus in the written word part of it wasn't just that I'd learned all these things and wanted to collate them and put them out in a book. It was driven by how many people ask for crystals for this topic. For many years now, I've worked at one of our local kind of witchy shops here in Central Florida, and during 2020 and kind of forward, I was working, we'll just say lots of hours, lots and lots and lots of hours. And it was a fearful time. It was a stressful time. In many ways, it still is, but the character of it has changed. Our comfort levels with that kind of stress has changed. But the majority of people coming into that shop, particularly for the first time, wanted something to help them feel safe, whether it was a crystal or a candle, a box of incense, protection, safety, well-being. These were key words that, sometimes I heard hundreds of times a day. Um, and I thought, well, I think I can take my skills as a practitioner and a writer and put them out, take all these ideas, put them between two covers, and give people access to them. And so I started writing it actually in 2019, and then kind of with fervor, I leaned into it in 2020 until I just hit a wall and eventually started writing other books. So, but I did eventually pick it up. I think that little lapse in time allowing some of that stuff to gestate was really helpful. If I just kind of continued what I'd started in 2019, the book would look really different. I also think that if I'd written the entirety of it in a, post 2020 world, it would also look very different. So this book kind of reflects my changing practice over these last 5 or so years, and that's um, going back and rereading some of these things that I wrote almost 6 years ago now is really kind of surreal, and it's interesting to see how it all came together.
I really love your story and love how many people you must have helped over that time because I agree that this has been like a crazy 5 years. And I actually started this podcast in January 2020, like not even knowing what was going to be coming. And just like the way the world has changed is absolutely wild. And I think your book is going to be helpful for a lot of listeners because I have a lot of listeners who have self-reported being very sensitive. And I wonder if that's very common amongst witches and occult practitioners because we're just so much more in tune with our environment. And that sensitivity runs through all of us, like you said, being, outcast as kids. And just, I think that having a resource like this is going to be very helpful to all of those people out there who have told me that they pick up on everything from everyone around them.
Yeah, there's like so many layers to this identity that's centered around or enveloped in sensitivity. And I think some of it is the kind of dominant overculture wanting to foist labels upon people, from highly sensitive person to empath to neurodivergent. These are all ways that we can recognize some level of additional sensitivity or awareness to our environs and everything in it. But at the end of the day, where we choose to put our attention, what we allow to be, we'll say, the driving force in our personal narratives. I mean, obviously there are influences beyond our control. Um, I have an anxiety disorder. I don't get to just make that go away by carrying a rock or thinking good thoughts. But I can also work with some, we'll say, mitigations to that. We can help to um, leverage the skills, the tools, the practices that give me a little bit more space, a little bit more bandwidth to be able to not let the anxiety take over on an average day. And that's where, something as tangible as a stone that you can wear or carry or keep with you, like, even if we don't look at it through the magical, the energetic lens, if we only look at it through the kind of symbolic and psychological lens, that physical touchstone can be such a powerful and palpable reminder of what we're aiming for in life and what our goals and intentions might be, and of the skills that we are cultivating. And then we also add to that the kind of energetic component, the magical side. They really can be life changing. And so I think so many of us come to the occult, the magical, the metaphysical, the all things kind of spooky ooky, because we don't fit in other places, and that can lead us to being sensitive. We might also get there because we were sensitive in the first place. And I love rocks because they endure. They are strong, they are stable. They remind us that we can cultivate those same qualities in ourselves.
And I appreciate that you are using examples like being sensitive and anxiety because I think some people have a misconception when they hear like psychic self-defense and psychic attack that it's specifically another occult practitioner out there that is targeting them. And that's not really what happens most of the time. I feel like that's actually a very rare occurrence.
Oh, 100%. I hope I don't overemphasize this point in the book, but actual psychic attack, formal magical attack, this is extraordinarily uncommon. And yet it is like a huge worry of people who are kind of beginners to the witchy world. And as kindly and respectfully as possible. Some part of me always wants to like giggle when a new practitioner is concerned about being the victim of like a curse or something along those lines, because the truth is that practitioners who understand the mechanics of cursing well enough to make it work who can also engage in the spiritual and energetic side of producing a curse and are willing to incur whatever the ethical results of that are going to be are pretty rare. To get all three of those pieces in place is quite uncommon. And then on top of that, like when you meet the person from the small town who's never met another witch or occultist, has never joined a witch group on Facebook yet even, and they're worried about having been cursed, it's just like, well, who do you think did it then? If you don't know anyone capable of doing it, then who did it? And the truth is that the vast majority of psychic harm that we experience is is generated by ourselves, our own thoughts, our own emotions, our own fears, our own baggage, our own traumas. They can sometimes trickle out and gain momentum until they feel like an avalanche. And there are just so many other ways that we can experience harmful or disruptive energy, which is not to say bad energy. That's another thing that I really try to emphasize in the book. Energy itself is morally neither good nor bad. Electricity is not good or evil. We can use it to heat up our leftovers in the microwave, or we could use it to electrocute another living being. And the free flow of electrons that is electricity is not good or evil in either of those circumstances. It's the outcome. So energy, vibration, vibes, whatever you want to call it, that's just in the wrong place at the wrong time can cause harm. And it's not so much that someone is out there trying to send you evil, trying to send you harm. It's that when something disrupts the natural cycle, the natural course, our normal state of balance, then we experience a response to that. And that can look very similar to actual psychic attack, but more likely than not, it isn't.
Yeah, I think that comes across well in your book. I do have to say for listeners, like I don't think you try to, beat it over the head. Like nobody's out there attacking you, but you very specifically focus on things like your personal self and warding your space. It's not that somebody is attacking you. It's just that these things are out there in our environment, in this world we live in, especially this changed world over the last couple of years. And those energies can invade your space in a way that you don't want them to.
Yeah, totally. And on top of that, the more we cultivate our spiritual skills, the more we become psychically sensitive, two things happen. We can pick up more background noise than we ever did before. And if we don't have effective tools for managing that, then it can feel overwhelming. And also, the more we kind of crank up our energy levels, the more brightly we shine, the more the things in the background take notice of us. So we don't get only one or the other. Both kind of happen simultaneously. And while I think most energies and entities out there in the ethers are pretty ambivalent about human life, kind of the same way we regard insects. Like most of the time, we just don't pay attention to them. We know they're there, they're important doing the jobs they're doing, but they don't mean much to our everyday lives. And that's kind of how I think most things out there feel about us, because they just have their own stuff going on. But when we start to encroach upon their space, when we start to journey into those in-between spaces, then they take notice of us because we're behaving differently than most of our compatriots here in our human world. And there's again nothing good nor bad about that, but it is true that the more we do this work, the more sensitive we will become. And as long as we have good psychic hygiene, good grounding and centering skills, good cleansing practices, if we make a habit out of taking care of our space, then all of that is a non-issue. It's a cliche, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the way the book is kind of structured begins with those really foundational things. I almost said really boring things. They do look boring when you've done them for long enough, which is why I try to do something a little bit different with them in each book. But if if we know how to cleanse our crystals, ourselves, our space, if we know how to have the just really simple kind of energetic boundaries and wards, then most of the intrusive energy that ends up in our trajectory is taken care of.
And I love the way that you present that in the book because I don't think you spend too much time on that before you get into like really practical, helpful solutions in here. So I think it's like a really good balance, before you get into like the crystal grids and everything. And I love the illustrations and the photos that you have in your book because crystal grids can be so complicated if you don't have a picture in front of you. When a book is just explaining it, I'm like, I have no idea what I just read that I'm supposed to do.
Well, thank you. I can't take all the credit for that. I came up with the grids, but my husband is my photographer and graphic designer for all those diagrams that are in here. So I've had to
Oh.
learn his visual language, and he's had to learn my less than visual language to make this work. But every project that we work on gets easier and easier, and we really had fun, I think, making these diagrams. I've gotten to the point where now I get on Canva and I make mock-ups of grids, and even though I'm limited by the tools there, and far less savvy with my visual spatial reasoning skills than him. It's made it so much fun to kind of put all this together.
Well, he did an excellent job because I found this very helpful. I am going to this week, it's on my goals list for this week to do your household cleansing and protection grid that has the selenites and the black tourmalines around the corners because my house is like set up perfectly like your picture to place them in all the right spots. And I was like, yes, this is exactly what I'm going to be doing to start the new year.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's such a simple one, but it does a great job. And the diagrams for a lot of these household grids that are in the book are are illustrated in a, we'll say, quadrangular format, but ultimately, no matter what size and shape your space is, you can adapt these. You might have to change the number of stones. You can contract them to fit around a single room instead of a whole home, depending on the needs that you've got. But yeah, that is such an easy one, and it's kind of a combination of like two different things I learned from two different streams of thought, and it eventually just made sense to put them together. I really endeavored to start with really simple and accessible tools. Selenite, super cheap. If you buy it in the right place, it is not expensive, especially that satin spar variety like you've got in the illustration for that diagram. And you can get some inexpensive rough or tumbled tourmaline for the corners quite easily. So yeah, I like those easy practices. I love the complicated and far more ceremonial practices as well. I will admit that they are not the mainstay of my practice, though. They're like the icing on the cake. They come out when I really need it. But it's the easy things that get everyday use.
I agree. I'm the same in my practice. If I get too caught up in complicated spells and rituals, I'm just not going to do them. And I like them once in a while, usually related to Sabbats and other holidays. But for like the daily things, I really prefer the simple ones. It just works better with my brain.
I absolutely get that. And I've gone through periods where I've made a real concerted effort to build that very ritualized kind of habit, or in my crystal practice, to make really elaborate grids and layouts and do these deep meditations. And those were important periods of my life. Um, these days, I do a lot. My husband might say I do too much, um, far too much. And so I've had to assess what I have space for. And that changes from day to day, from week to week, year to year. And I think this year in particular, with the launch of two books and like a crazy person, I decided to write another one. Um, I I'm curious to see what my practice is going to look like as I fill in those gaps between those other projects with things that feed my soul rather than just my bank account. I'm really making time and space to do things that are not related to my work, which is a really good practice for humans in general to follow. But I think a lot of us that end up in the kind of witchy world, we kind of make everything related to magic, everything related to the mystical. And, you know, yes, everything is magical. Like Jason Miller says, the world is enchantable as you make it, or life is as enchantable as you make it. So nothing is not mystical. But at the same time, if I try to achieve a magical outcome with every second of my day, um, when am I recharging my batteries? When am I allowing myself to just be? When am I not engaging with my career? Because we need time for our avocations and not just our vocations. And one of the ways that we can achieve that is by having a space that is warded, by having a regular spiritual hygiene practice, by knowing how to ground and center, and letting some of that just kind of run in the background. Yeah, we need to do it mindfully, but then once we've set it up, it takes care of stuff for us. So that's why I really like these simple practices these days, because it gives me time and energy to do what I need to do.
I absolutely am feeling that. That's why I'm excited to try out some of the grids, especially that house warding one, because it's simple and I do get to set it and forget it. And then if it, becomes less effective, I'm going to feel that and know that I, need to refresh it or do it again, something like that. But it's not something I'm thinking about actively and working on every single day. And the thought of that is just really nice to me that I get to take a little bit of a break.
Yeah, it's important that we give ourselves permission to take the easy way out every now and then.
Absolutely. Well, I think that you already covered a lot of great advice, but before we wrap up, do you have any other advice that you would like to offer to beginners who are listening to this and are looking to pick up one of your books for the first time?
Yeah, particularly with regards to the information that's in this book, um, I I think a really helpful like framework when approaching crystals for protection or crystals for psychic self-defense. The directory has 145 stones in it. You won't need 145 stones. Um, you can have them. I mean, I certainly have more than that. This book at one point had a list of like 170, 160, somewhere around there, and I pared it down a little bit. Um, but the idea is that any crystal that we work with, any gemstone that we connect to that helps us feel nourished and helps us feel centered, that complements us in a way that brings us into balance, is going to have the natural result of improving our psychic self-defense. Because when we are nourished, when we are energetically taken care of, our system's natural boundaries can do their job. We have a physiological immune system, and in a way we also kind of have a psychic immune system. And when we are depleted in any sense, our defenses drop, both in the material and in the metaphysical. So if you're having trouble deciding what crystal you need for psychic self-defense, of course, you can go through all 145 entries and try to find the one that seems like it matches your life circumstance the best. But you can also go to your most beloved, your most trusted crystal allies, whether or not their textbook definition is about protection, and see who feels most in sync with you on a given day, and guaranteed that is going to improve those energetic boundaries in the long run.
That is excellent advice. One that I need to take to heart because I was looking through all 145 and I was like, I need this one, I need this one, I need this one. Because like I said, I am a sucker for the pretty shiny crystals. And I'm like, I don't have a lot of these, even though I have a huge collection. So I need to rein it in. But so many of them are calling to me.
As a big ol' nerd, I'm always trying to add new things to my collection that I don't have. And one of my like subversive goals with this book was to at least include a certain percentage of rocks that I've never written about before. So I was able to achieve that. Approximately 20% of the stones in this book don't appear in any of my other books. That's the other way that I keep this exciting for me. So that way I'm not just hitting the same stones in every publication.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I learned so much just reading through all of those because there were so many that I hadn't heard of. So I'm definitely going to have to find more to add to my collection because I'm a little magpie, can't help myself. But Nicholas, thank you so much for being here today and sharing about your story and your book. I feel like this is going to be a resource that's going to be helpful to a lot of listeners, in particular to this podcast, who also identify as sensitive, empaths, picking up on what's going on in the world. I think they're really going to appreciate everything you offer in this book.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me on the show.
Listeners, I'm going to have everything linked as always in the show notes and over at witchwednesdays.com. So you can check out Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense and all of the other books that Nicholas has written and shared with the world. And that is everything that I have for you this week. I will see you all next week.
Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast, and you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.